And it's Thursday evening. And like I promised you last week, that we are going to be talking about family dynamics. September is about family dynamics. And tonight we are discussing family matters and social bias. We want to know who determines what families should look like. Who looks out for young people when they want to be something else, but the family or the society decides on their behalf? My name is Matsileng Mohodi, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm with two wonderful ladies here, and they're going to introduce themselves before we get on into our discussion. Ruth, let's start with you.
Thank you, Matseling, and thank you for the invitation. Esther, pleased to share the platform with you. So I am a teacher of English. I've taught English for 39 years, but I also developed a love for leadership, personal development, and I've combined those with my love of English literature and my, I suppose, talent as a poet to be able to reach different platforms, to speak to different people, and really be able to ventilate voices in a different way. And certainly for people to be able to speak through the voice of poetry, song, or drama is a very powerful voice, and it's a voice that makes a difference. So I combine all of those things.
Wonderful. Wow. Esther?
Oh, Matsileng, I don't know where to start.
But anyway.
I've been around for a very long time in terms of my career. Maybe to just start by indicating that I'm a social worker by profession, but I just practiced for a few years and I developed other interests. And I took the human rights trajectory. And that's what led me to where I am. But to cut the long story short, I'm a public servant. I work in the Department of Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities. But what also got me here is the fact that I'm a gender activist. And I feel very passionate about the rights of everyone, but in particular women. And my bias is towards the most vulnerable. As you well know, our department is a department not only of women, its mandate has expanded to include youth and persons with disabilities. So that's me, that's where I am. But I've worked in many organizations, but just in a nutshell, I've been in the private sector before. During my earlier career, I moved into the civil society sector, but I also now work for a number of years in the public service. And that's where I am. So I've struggled a number of sectors.
You've been everywhere. You've done it all.
That's why I say, we'll talk the whole day if I start telling you about.
So ladies, tonight's talk is more around, how, I always say it. I'm sure people will start getting bored about me saying I love young people, and I just feel that there is so much that we can prevent them from going through by just sharing information, by just talking about things, by just helping them to communicate with their parents. Because I think a lot of problems emanate from having families that are biased due to what society expects. So tonight, I want us to just discuss, what determines how a family should look like. Who determines the rules? Who says this family must be this or that? Is it culture? Where does it come from? And are we allowed to change? Are we allowed to adapt? Because by not adapting, we are experiencing a lot of problems in our families. And also, I think I want us to also touch on, when people are different, they suffer the most. And it becomes even worse if the family itself is not accepting of their young ones, whether it's about career or about sexuality or about whatever the young person would want to choose. So I want us to just talk about where does it come from and what can we do to change that.
I think if I may, Matseling, the most important thing to start with, and Esther, you will know this so well, is that for anyone, the two fundamentals are psychological safety and belonging. And if we don't have psychological safety and belonging, then we are lost. So if you are a child growing up in a family where you are rejected by the very unit that should be protecting you, then it's a very, very tough place to be. And you will do anything to find that belonging. And very often when children misbehave, it's not about being naughty. It's about being in that place where they can actually find belonging. So they'll be naughty to be with another group. It's not being naughty. It's just being, where can I find the place where I'm safe? So I think
where I'm
those
understood.
Yes. Yeah.
Where I can be who I want to be, who I am, who I truly am.
Yeah.
Esther?
Sure, Ruth. You've hit it on the nail. But me, and bear with me, when I sometimes engage in this kind of conversations, I want to give people context so they really understand the basis. And I hope I don't bore you with my explanation, but it's important to understand. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I was caught by, looking at your advert. When you asked, let's talk about family values. What are they? Who sets them? I think that's very critical. That's the fundamental. And I want to link it to what Ruth said. So I'm a very big picture person. So it's important to understand, and I want to start it with socialization and try and define what socialization is. Just for a moment, I hope you can still see me on the screen, but I'm referring to my notes a little bit, so
That's fine.
you can understand what I'm talking about. So I just try to refresh myself to look at what is the definition of socialization and how does it link to family. It says it's a process by which culture is transmitted to the younger generation and men learn the rules and practices of social groups to which they belong. The term socialization refers to the process of interaction through which the growing individual learns the habits, attitudes, values, and beliefs of a social group into which he or she is born. So that's the definition of socialization. Now, let's link it. By the way, the family is the smallest unit of society. So it doesn't exist outside society. And it is the critical unit where that socialization happens. Now the question, coming to your question, who sets the values and norms of family? I think it's family itself. Remember, norms and values are principles, rules that families agree upon in which they're going to interact with each other. But these values and norms are drawn somewhere, and they're drawn from society. And there are various institutions of society that sets those principles, societal principles and rules. For instance, culture, cultural institutions, religious institutions. Can you see? That's that, and then it gets into family. And that's where families choose which values are most important to them, which principles, and the most common ones that most of us adhere to. Example, you go to church every Sunday, because those families believe that a religious institution is the most important institution that promotes socialization, but it directs you in a particular way. You get certain values out of that. That is why some families attach so much a value into that kind of institution, because it teaches you values that they regard as right, to take you out of what they regard as wrong. You understand what I'm saying? So
yes,
I'm trying to explain.
So it's something that has been determined, predetermined.
Yes, it doesn't exist on its own. It's the smallest unit of society, and it's used as a vehicle to socialize people that come to this world, and therefore broadens up. So, but it's important also to understand that it's not the only unit that socializes you. As I said, outside that family, you pick up other values in these other institutions that may not necessarily come out of the family, but family, obviously, the most important. And that's where it links to what Ruth says, because it creates a structure. Let me just end by saying it creates a structure, because imagine if we lived without boundaries, a framework within which we can function, there would be anarchy in the world. So it creates a structure that also provides what Ruth said: safety, sense of belonging, etc. Can you see how it links? So yeah. I just thought it's important to give that kind of overview, because it builds a foundation at which me and Ruth will be able to interact from. Yes. Thank you.
So now look at it this way. So there are these social structures that are supposed to guide society, provide some direction for families to latch on. But if we look at society today, we look at our young ones, we look at families themselves, there are lots of problems. So where are we going wrong? What is it about what we are taking? Is it because people are evolving? People are seeing things differently? Because these things have been there. And by virtue of having these systems in place, these societal systems that are meant to support society, by having them, I'm assuming we shouldn't be having the types of problems that we have amongst our youth and amongst our families. So where is it going wrong? Why is it so difficult for families or for young people to step out and find what they think is truth that can help them to rebuild? Why can we not start to rebuild from somewhere? Why is it so difficult?
May I, because there's just the most wonderful analogy, I think, that speaks to this. And Esther, I love your use of the word regard in terms of values, because we can't assume that values are good. Principles are good, but values are changeable. And what families adopt as values may not necessarily be particularly good. You know, They may have the value of having a wonderful car, and others may have the value of wanting to go to church. So it's that regard that you are talking about that is absolutely correct. But there is an academic, Maluleki, who talks about the structures of racism, the structures of religion. And he talks about the house that has been built. So the architect comes along, designs and builds the house. Once that house has been built, nobody needs to support the structure. It's there. So whatever you have in society in terms of the structure that has been built, Matseleng, in answer to your question, it's not something that has happened overnight. That structure is the house that has been built. The child walks into that house. That building then confines them in terms of how it has been built. And nobody questions it. You know, this is the way Granny and Grandpa said it should be done. So that's the way that room looks. That's
This
the
is
way
how it's always been done.
That's how it's always been done. And we don't question it. We just go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. But what can we do? Because I'm telling you, if we don't change how we are running our families, we are letting our kids down. And if we are letting our own kids down, what is going to happen to their own kids? Because it means this is just just going to continue snowballing without really getting solutions. So who at this point could take the stance and say, okay, I'm starting this. I am changing how we are doing things in my family, in my society. Because if you change within the family, it's easier to impact society, because then you can empower your own family, and then the other family can also get empowered, and then you become the reflection of the new society. You wanted to say something, Esther?
You know, I like what Ruth said.
Not what I said.
Because I'm answering
everything you said,
but we are respondents. So you know, Ruth said something very important, and again, I take the angle of society and try and link it to family. It's important also to understand that society, cultures, what we regard as culture and traditions are dynamic. They change from society, one generation to the other. And if that's also a foundation if that also provides a foundation for family. Ruth made reference to a structure that is there, a house that is built, and we all subscribe to what we found when we came to the world, because we found it like that.
Yeah.
Yes, in terms of structure, as in King, no.
The building itself or the structure?
Building itself might not change. But as human beings, we are part of society. So we change over time depending on the circumstances of that era that we live in, that period that we live in. So society influences also what happens in family. So that is why you find, Matsileng, every generation, you may grow up in a family, particular family, but as you learn, remember what I said earlier on, and that was significant. You are not only socialized by your family, you socialize also by other institutions. You go to school, it's a very important institution. You meet people, you learn certain things, that influences how you see the world and changes. That's where you begin to see contradictions also in family and conflict. You know, sometimes you become conflicted because your parents will teach you this, and then you go to school, you learn. Let's take as easy as example as politics. You know, my parents were not very political. I go to university, I learn sociology, I learn politics, and I begin to see a world in a different way. and I'm told this is the right way to go. I learn human rights, what they mean, etc. So that is why often we become very conflicted, because then you come back home and you hear your parents consistently saying this, that Ruth was saying, that these rules shouldn't change. That's what should govern this household. But you start to question even those rules. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm.
And it happens with every generation and it's natural.
Yeah.
So that's why we have children, we have teenagers, we have adults. We go through phases in life, because as you grow to be an adult, you learn to be independent, to make your own decisions, to choose what is most valuable for you, what is not valuable for you. And sometimes that conflicts with what the family rules and principles are. And I think that's where the problem is. And Ruth said something very important. There are things that, I don't know how to put this, to say not every value and principle is wrong or negative, but not everyone is right. It depends where you are sitting. So we are free beings. We're free to choose.
But
And
we're free to choose, but are we really free? Are we really free? Because we are free to choose, but we choose to be free.
You know, Mutseling, again, another one of the wonderful things about coaching is learning from the people with whom I work. And one of those people is a wonderful writer who deals with early childhood development called Helen Lumge. And she has, in fact, written a book on early childhood development and telling stories and how important that is. And I had a conversation with her, and this was just so profound. And I hope that you will find this profound, because it changed the way I thought about children and about stories. And she said this: think about a simple story like Humpty Dumpty. Right? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Now, did Humpty Dumpty fall? Or was he pushed? Or did he jump? Humpty Dumpty never has a voice in the story. And very often, children do not have a voice in their own stories. That voice is erased. So where you want to make change, by the time a child gets to an adult, we know that there are about 5 psychological hits that will have happened in that life. They are dealing with so many story threads of who they are and who they aren't, and whether they have a voice or don't have a voice by the time they get to an age where they can express it, that a lot of that has been diluted. And if I can give just one remedy to that was really lacking in my childhood, growing up in South Africa in a very repressed and repressive society, as we all know. But as a young gay girl, I had no idea what was wrong with me, because there were no role models. There was no vocabulary for me. So until we give children the vocabulary to use around their own experience, how can they stand up for their own values or what they think or who they are? I didn't know who I was or what I was until I was 28.
I love what you said about children not having a voice.
Yeah.
They continue to adapt to what the family expects them to become, but they don't have a voice, yet they have the freedom to be who they are. So how do we bridge that divide, that gap, where we can encourage parents? Because I will always take it back to parents, because if parents are open enough, then the child can find their own voice and not have to go through what you just mentioned, with all those psychological issues by the time they're at a certain age. And they can be able to know that there's nothing wrong with them. They're just who they are. There's nothing wrong with them. How do we help parents to understand that their children are fine exactly as they are? Because when they try to support what society expects of them, then that has a great impact on young people. So I just wanted also to just ask one thing. There's if you look at young people today, there's a lot of anxiety and depression. I'm sure it was there during our times when we were growing up. I don't know, I'm not sure. But when we look at how serious it is today, would we say it's because of not having enough support within the home, from the immediate family? Or is it pressure because they can't fit in on the outside? Would we say it's societal bias and pressure, or is it something because they really can't be themselves within the family and that makes them to sort of go in?
Esther, do you want to?
These are it's a very complex conversation. And maybe to answer directly to your question, we are always advised as families to be more open, to allow children to have a voice. But again, I keep on trying to make you understand, and I'm not justifying anything, by the way. I'm just trying to help us understand why perhaps families, individuals as part of families behave the way we do. I think, at least for our generation, we've lived in very close societies, what we call conservative. And there are things that we are taught that should not be spoken about. And Ruth put it very well. We grow up in families, in society that says children are to be seen but not heard. So we try and impose what we think is wrong, depending on our orientation and our socialization and our preferences as parents, by the way. But often we do it, I would say most of the time, I don't want to say all the time, out of goodwill, because of our understanding of what the role of a parent is. Often we'll do it by saying we are protecting a child, we love a child. There's a lot of justification to why we imposing certain things on our own children. But I think parents and families must learn more and more to be more flexible, to understand that their truth is not always all the truth or the whole truth, and that situations change and should be more open to accommodating what is happening with their children. I mean, the worst thing that you can do as a parent is to close a door and not want to engage and understand your children and understand what they're going through on a daily basis, how they feel. It's very important to touch base. And I think when you create that space, you're opening it for engagement. And I must say, Matsileng, it becomes very difficult, even for parents. Let's, for a change, put ourselves in the shoes of parents also. When the only truth is what you've learned also from your parents, they only learned it from their own parents, etc. And to change those views, it is the most challenging thing you can have. I think.
But Esther, let me challenge you with this. When you know that this is what you've learned from your own parents, but you can see that it's not working, would you still continue doing it simply because it's been done? Maybe
that's what I'm saying. We need to learn to be more open, to be more flexible, to be more understanding, and to understand that our children have their own lives, they have their own experiences that they have. And I think that the most important thing is listening and engaging. And I'm just saying, I think it's not the easiest thing for a parent to do, but I think it's the right thing to do if you really want to understand what is going on.
Yeah.
In
I'm going to ask you something, but I don't need an answer. If parents were to just watch their kids, make sure that their kids are safe, what kind of society would we have? Just let them be, let them do the things that they love, but make sure that they don't get themselves into trouble. What kind of society would we have? But I want to come back to Ruth. Ruth, you mentioned something very important about growing up in an oppressive time when, as a gay young woman, you didn't know, what to do. In today's times, we see a lot of bias and a lot of discrimination against gay people. And there is no way that people just woke up and they decided, no, today I think I'm going to be gay. So why is society finding it so difficult to understand that people can be who they were born to be? Because when we start to put rules and say, if you are born a girl, you must be a wife, you must be a woman, and you can't be with another woman. I think with Esther, you deal with a lot of violence against women, and I think we'll also I would like us to touch on that, where a lot of women, have been even raped. I think you mentioned something like that, Ruth, where there was corrective rape, because guys would think they're helping you to go back and become a woman, this woman that they expect you to become. And it's sad because now a lot of young people, but fortunately, a lot of young people are opening up. But they're opening up, but the parents are still not there. So what can we do to make parents understand that it's okay? It is okay when your child is different, because that's who they are.
Yeah, and of course, using words like different also puts an immediate bias and stigma onto it, doesn't it? So do I have to say I'm different? I'm normal for me.
Different according to society, yes.
Yes, but I'm normal for me, and depending where I am, maybe somebody else would be different. So it's so subtle, isn't it? The layers of language that we use in order to contain
We
people.
perpetuate it, yeah.
We do.
Right.
I saw a wonderful cartoon on Twitter just, I think, yesterday. There was a mother, and standing in front of the mother was a child. I think it was a little boy, and this little boy was teasing another child. But the interesting thing about the visual was that there was a tongue coming from the mother's mouth, and it went down and through the child's mouth. And that's what we do. You see, we quite literally give our voice to our children, who then perpetuate. So there are so many microaggressions in the way we teach children to teach other children who are different. So even something like, oh, come over here, Ruth, don't stand close to that child, or just a look. It doesn't have to be a verbal thing. We have macro and microaggressions at every single level. But what I do want to say, Matseling, in terms of what can we do, we can flip and step up and be role models. Because it's when we see other people and hear the voices of other people that we find our own identity and say, oh, okay, I do have somewhere that I belong. There is somebody else like me. It goes back to that central thing of belonging.
Yes.
And if you think about a family as a book and society as a library, oh my goodness, there are a lot of books in that library that need to be read. And we know that literature teaches empathy. Literature puts us into somebody else's experience. So really, one of the jobs, it's not just parents. I mean, I said I've taught for 39 years. My partner has taught for many years, and we've had these conversations. It's at that little level where you start giving children books to read that normalize what society looks like and doesn't look like. And schools and teachers have a role there, and the ECD teachers have a huge role there because those are the formative years. So how do we tell stories to those children?
I like that. So Ruth, I think like I was saying, one of the things today is that young people have been able to tell that, to be who they are. The problem, people that are lagging are parents.
But that
So
is what I'm saying to you, that you actually, there's a thing called the boomerang effect. And that boomerang effect means the more I hold a truth and you try to change my mind on that truth, the more I must find evidence to support my truth, otherwise I'm not okay. And
perfect.
so when you come up against somebody with a very deeply rooted opinion, you've got to find ways around it, because if you come up against it directly, you just entrench their point of view. So having the conversation with parents, if you say, right, parents, sit down, we're going to talk about why it's okay for your daughter Ruth to be gay. No. If that is not their cultural, religious understanding, they will just put the shutters up and find all the reasons why they shouldn't listen. So it has to be a more subtle way of doing it.
And I think, like Esther was saying, she's deep in thought. I think, like she was saying, that it's something that is going to take time. It's going to grow organically, where people start to listen and to learn. We can't just shove it down their throats. But my biggest problem is always around, where do we start? Especially around with parents, that I always worry about, where do we start? There was a question that somebody asked, and it's also around societal bias, where they said, how do we, because how gay couples are not trusted with children. So, but who's to say they don't have the ability to do that, because they're parents to those children? And I think it also feeds to the violence that gets perpetuated against families that choose to do things in their own way. So, Esther, maybe from your side, have you? I'm sure you've witnessed quite a lot of those kinds of things, where gay couples are assumed to not be good parents simply because they are same-sex couples.
Yeah, it's
It needs 1 week.
yeah, it's a very difficult, and I hear what Ruth is saying, but I want to maybe share from what we are trying to do to answer your question, which is not easy, by the way, Ruth.
Yeah, I know.
It's not easy because it's one thing to give a child a book to read and understand who they are. But it's important, and this is the biggest challenge, to understand that even as they transform, and for lack of a better word, and begin to understand who they are, and I can't overemphasize that they operate within society.
Yeah.
And a society with particular values that are dominant, the dominant narrative and understanding of what a woman and a man's roles should be. And that's our biggest challenge. If it was that easy, Matilene, I would give you a straightforward answer. But that's exactly the complexity of what we are trying to address, because it means literally re-socializing society, which operates within a patriarchal system, which has a certain expectations of what me and Ruth, because of our biological makeup, what roles we should be occupying, how we should be living our lives, and what we should be doing and not doing. And that's a battleground. And what we're trying to do is not lose hope, to throw our hands in the air and say, oh, this is impossible. We are planting a seed. We are trying to ensure that Ruth rightfully, we start at school level, at ECD level, what Ruth is saying, to try and teach kids that it's okay to be who they are, starting with their own biological makeup, accepting and loving their bodies, to accepting how they feel about themselves and what they choose to do in life. We believe that when you start working at that level, and we are considering a number of programs that probably are evidence-based, we know can work, produce the right results. We think we can make a reasonable impact compared to changing me and you at our age. We don't want to, it's very difficult to change people's attitudes and behavior that they've carried throughout half their years.
Yeah, but there's a comment here to exactly what you're saying. Who is this? It's Chanel. She says, sometimes in a family, religion divides more than what it brings family together, because children are afraid to express themselves openly and authentically. So even if we're allowing children to express themselves, but in some families, it's going to be very difficult for them to face the mother or the father or the grandfather or even the immediate relatives and society. So in as much as, yes, we're saying they can start and understand, but if I don't understand as a parent, how do I even allow them to be who they want to become?
Yeah,
it's a very difficult one.
Matseling, it's so interesting because in my own journey, I was 48 until I was openly gay.
You were?
48 years old before I was openly gay. That is a long time to suck your identity in. That is a long time to be living on the broken edges of other people's lives, watching your pronouns, curating who you are. And society, and Esther is right, so at the lower levels, kids have moved and are moving. But the blockage is in the structure that has been built. So the kids are outside building a new garden, but the structure is still there, and they still have to come back into that structure. And I finished over the weekend doing some prelim marking for a school. There were 194 essays that I marked. And can I tell you, Esther, you would have wept. And I actually feel traumatized by the sadness and the sorrow in so many of those young hearts, because they cannot be who they are. And here they are on a page telling a complete stranger, this is who I am. Who will hear me? Who will have the ears and the heart to hear me?
That's
and
exactly
they were talking about abuse. They were talking about being gay and not being accepted. They were talking about being bullied. They were talking about not being part of their families. This is the reality of where our children are. We don't hold them safely. I think you said that earlier, Matseling. We don't hold them safely.
We don't provide safe spaces for them. So that is why, and I understand what Esther is saying about it being difficult to change. I mean, it's so difficult to change. Yeah. It's so difficult.
And the question for me, Matseling, sorry to interject, is do parents even know better? I mean, I'm struggling also in certain areas just because of the way I was raised in a very religious family. You get very conflicted when you are confronted with certain situations. And I look at my two daughters. And my mom, who's 85, and how sometimes she is just so baffled by how my kids, you can see the huge generation gap. So one of the things that we encourage in our work, it's having what we call generational dialogues. Because the question is, Ruth, for instance, your parents, do you think they had known any better? They only are operating within what they know best, what they've been taught to be true and the only truth. So I don't have easy answers, but I just think this kind of conversations need to happen more and more in wherever platform that we can create and find it, so that we can engage. I mean, just look at this conversation. It's look at our age. And probably people who are listening to us are young people. And you wish you at least had a voice of a young person also, just to hear the other voice and what,
Oh, they're in pain. They're in pain because we are refusing to change. And so maybe like for you, Esther, like maybe we could look at programs that are geared more towards adults rather than geared towards the young people. Because if you educate or you try to instill some form of change on the adults, then they start to understand their impact on their young ones. So maybe we need to be looking at that rather than spending a lot of time and money on young people, because they still go back to that house, that structure. They still have to go back to that. And if it's still hot or if it's still cold, it's not going to change. And that is why then the child will now run to try and fit in somewhere. So maybe we need to look at programs for parents, programs for adults, so that we can start to see the impact that we have on the world, on our children, on the society, because we will not build society by avoiding doing certain things.
I don't know if Ruth wants to come in. I don't want to.
No, you guys.
But Matileng, I've always said, with the experience of work that I've done, I've always argued, if we are able to penetrate institutions like faith-based institutions, that's where a lot of socialization and reinforcement of particular values happen. I mean, just think about South Africa. I'm not sure about the percentage, but I understand a majority of the population are Christians. It's people that go to church. And you still have pastors that reinforces certain values and teach about Paul and what Paul believed in thousands and thousands of years ago. And there are people that are really passionate about Paul and they quote him at every turn. So I think that, let's be honest, there's also a shift that we are beginning to see, especially in this country because of gender-based violence, where we are beginning to engage. People are very interested to know, what is it that we can do? What are we doing wrong? So those spaces are beginning to open up, but we are far from where we want to be, very far. But I think what is happening in society forces people to engage in some kind of conversation and really understand what is it that it's going wrong and what is it that we can do to change it.
Yeah, there's another comment. Wisdom is not related to age. I know 12-year-olds who are more wise and insightful than adults who are 30 to 40 years their senior.
Absolutely true. because children have a naivety and a way of seeing the world that is not as filtered and layered as the adult lens. Um,
Mm.
and as I said earlier, very often we discount children's voices because, well, how would you know? You haven't had life experience, you don't know.
Mm.
But there is tremendous wisdom in children and in their stories and the way they see the world.
Yes. That is why I asked that question. If we were to let our young ones be themselves, do the things, explore, do the things that they need to do, but make sure, just provide them with safety, make sure that we protect them. But we don't instill in them the things that never worked for us because we're trying to live our lives through our children. We still want them to do things that never worked for us. So how do we expect those children to now thrive or change what we couldn't change, what our parents couldn't change, what our grandparents couldn't change? But we still enforce those very values that we know. I'll just call it values for the sake of the conversation. But we still try to enforce those things that we know have never worked. And Esther, you mentioned like with church institutions. And there's obviously a lot that could be done to help society through that. And it means, I don't want us to even get into religion right now, but we know that there is so much that is happening there because you look at society. Society is a reflection of all these institutions. We look at education as well. It's an institution. So all of these institutions are impacting on the world today. And is it what we want? Is it what we want to see? Or is there something else that we really need to wake up and say, enough is enough? We have brains. We've been given brains to think. The world is evolving. So are we choosing to not see the evolution because we've been given brains to think and to be logical? And if we refuse to use that, whose fault is it? Are we still going to say it's society? Are we still going to say, who are we blaming?
It's interesting.
I know. I'm frustrated. I'm very saddened that I don't know what our world is going to look like in 5 years, even 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I'm saddened because of how things are going. I love watching stars. There is so much out there. There is so much to learn. There is so much to explore. But we are choosing to be inside a cocoon because we feel protected. But are we? Are we protected inside this cocoon? Are we protected, or is this cocoon crushing us to death?
Yeah, no, there is no protection and no cocoon. That's an illusion, isn't it? And the very idea of safety. A very quick story of a friend of mine who her daughter climbed up to the top of a tree and her grandmother was there looking after them. And she called the little girl to come down. So the little girl was quite a good gymnast. She had climbed up to the top of the tree, came down, and Granny said to her, "Right, Amy, I need you to sit here quietly." So she sat on the veranda on a little wall, and she fell off the wall and broke her arm. And I wrote a poem about that called Sky Dancers. And the point of that poem is that when we are in adult safe places, that's where we are in our most dangerous places because they will call us down from our aspirations, from our dreams, from our knowings, from our reaching into the soul of who we are and make us sit on the veranda of what they think is best. And then we fall off and break our arm, break our heart, break our soul. So we've got to let children climb those trees and hold our breath.
Brilliant. I love that. We are dangerous.
We are their gravity. We are their gravity.
If we don't look at ourselves, and I'm not saying parents are bad. I'm not saying that at all.
Of course not.
But I'm just saying we have so much power to change how things are, because children will resonate towards their parents. It's natural. But the fact is, if they are not being themselves, they will resonate whilst you're supporting them. And because they have nowhere else to go. But as soon as they can escape, they will escape you. And you don't know what's going to happen to them when they're out there. Ruth, I would like you to recite one of your poems for us. I can see Esther is so deep in this. I can see she needs many more hours for us to go through this. So maybe, because I'm looking at the time, if you could just give us one of your beautiful poems.
Okay, I'm not going to do the one that I spoke to you about because I think it's too heavy. So let's end on a note of hope.
Finish us. Okay.
A note of hope. Is that good? The poem I was going to read was about corrective rape, but let's end with hope. And this poem is called Vugapapama. And I think, Matsiling, this is what you're talking about. We need to wake up, and we need to wake up quickly. You must believe that you can rise. Vugapapama, get up, get up. Shed yesterday's memory-muddled sheets. This is not the time for sleeping. Life is flowing under the tired mattress. Beyond the dark, tight night curtains, a furious sun is beating. Leave the bed, heavy with old excuses and hungry hurts. This is the time for courage. This is the time for courage. Woza, woza. Grass is springing up between the floorboards. The fearful house is flooding away. You know that you must rise. Vugapapama, get up. It is time. It is time for us to get up into the authenticity of the voice that we own and be brave enough to speak our truth loud enough for our children to speak with us.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. That's so profound.
Thank you.
Esther, yeah, oh, wow. It speaks to exactly what can help a lot of young people to believe in themselves and to know that this is the time.
This is the time.
To trust in their own abilities, that they are good. Because, no child is born dumb. No child is born stupid. No child is born arrogant. They learn to be that because of the experiences. So if they vuga, they papama, and they know that the world awaits them, who else can ask for more? Thank you, Ruth.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Interesting conversation. Thanks, Ruth. That's a powerful and positive poem to leave this conversation.
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you for the amazing work that you do in such a difficult space.
Yeah, it is. Thank you, and thank you for your work too. And let's keep the hope.
And thank you so much for bringing a lot of wisdom, a lot of stories, a lot of stuff that people can look at and think about and see what they can take away from this. We will not change the whole world, but if we can impact just one person, one child, one life, that's all that we can really do. So thank you so much for tonight and for this discussion. I think
thanks for creating the platform.
We need a glass of water.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks everyone, and thanks. Sorry we couldn't read all the comments and respond to everything, but I really hope that you've benefited. You've learned quite a lot from these two beautiful women. Thank you. And we'll see you again next week. This month, remember, we're still talking about family matters, family dynamics. Let us look at what is it that we can really do to change how our families are, because if we change our families, we change our societies. Right now, our families are driven by societies, but those societies are families. So let us do whatever we can to work on our families so that we can have a better place for young people, for the little ones. As oldies, it's we old, we done. So, but let's try to build a better world for you guys, for young people. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye and good night.